Hi, everybody. As you are coming into the room, I'm actually going to give you a do now. So I'm going to go to the next slide. We'll get to introductions and everything in a couple minutes. But while we wait for anybody else to join us, if you could try to think about the significance of place. So we have the acronym Mr. Help for you to provide some information about yourself. So when was the last time you moved? What region do you live in? How have you interacted with the land today for human environment? How many miles are you from your state's capital for location, and describe your place. All right, so take a couple minutes and please add that to the chat for right now while we wait for a couple more people to join us. Yeah, so Mr. Help is the little acronym that we put together for this. The M stands for moved, the R stands for region, the HE is for human environment, the L is for location, and the P is for place. So Mr. Help, to kind of help you through figuring out a little bit of an introduction for yourself. We can kind of compare where everybody's joining us from, and I'll share my answers again in a couple minutes too. So we'll give everybody I see a few more people still coming in and a couple of answers popping up into the chat. So we'll give you a couple more minutes to answer. If you can't answer all of them, that's fine. Answer a few, and just so we can get to know you a little bit. And if you have questions at all, feel free to just unmute and ask them. That's fine. I see somebody with their hand raised. Rich, go ahead. I think you might be muted right now.
Okay.
Oh,
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
Where is the chat on the taskbar down below?
So for me, it's next to where it says Q&A.
Share screen?
There, I see share. After share screen, I see participants, and then I see chat, and then Q&A.
Is it under Q&A?
For me, it's next to the notes where it says more.
Okay, I'm gonna look okay, yep, I think you may be right. Thank you.
That's good. It's amazing how everybody can have different places for all of them. So thank you for helping out with that. Seeing a lot of great answers. It's good to see where everybody's from. So I am seeing somebody who lives in the Northeast. I am also from the Northeast. I live in Bedminster. So I'll kind of go through my answers while everybody else finishes theirs in the chat. I live in Bedminster now. I moved probably about 13 years ago, coming up in November, from Bridgewater, which is really not that far from Bedminster. So pretty close by. Again, I live in the Northeast, and I consider myself to be in Central Jersey, even though a lot of people say Central Jersey does not exist. I think it exists. I think I live there. If you don't think it's Central Jersey exists, I guess I'm more in the northern portion, because, you know, there's like the New York side of New Jersey and there's the Philadelphia side of New Jersey. I'm more of that New York pull. For the human environmental, I actually did a little bit of gardening today, bought some trees over the weekend, some little tiny seedlings, trying to grow a couple more trees in the front yard there. So I did that. Location, I am 41 miles driving to Trenton, and then 29 miles away from like the way the crow flies, if you want to kind of go technical there. And place, right now I feel like it is uncharacteristically warm for New Jersey in the end of October. It's going to be in the 70s this week. And so that is definitely unusual. You know, gotta love climate change. You can check out the climate project too. I'll feel a little cozy and feel at home because I am at home. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I see other people. I was just talking about how we just got a dog. I see somebody went for a walk with their dog to go outside. From people from Midwest, from New York, wow, Stockholm, Sweden, nice. Now live in Canada. Love to see people from all over the place.
And South Jersey.
Yes, and South Jersey.
I don't know about that Central Jersey you're talking about, Andrea.
Oh, Carrie says that she's not getting audio. I am not sure how to help with that one. Okay, you just joined. There we go. Okay, good. Got the audio going. All right. So first, I would love to welcome everybody for coming tonight for where, if it is nighttime for where you are. It's great to see so many people joining. I'm so excited to talk to you about geography skills. So glad to see so many people on camera also. So, definitely as we go throughout this, and I have some norms that we'll get into in a couple minutes, but I love to see the on camera. I love to be able to hear everybody when they have questions and everything like that. So definitely feel free to unmute at any point. Before we really get into everything, I just want to go over our agenda. So what we're going to do, we have our overview and we have our icebreaker, which we just did, getting to know a little bit about where everybody's from, a little bit about what everybody did today. We're going to talk a little bit about what the OER project is, what the OER project approach to geography is, get a little input from you on how you integrate geography into the classroom currently, because even though we have a lot of ideas, I'm always learning and I love to hear ideas from other teachers also. We have what we call maptivity breakout rooms. So instead of activities, we call them maptivities. We have 3 different breakout rooms for you to work in small groups and really look into a couple of the different sources from OER project. We'll take some time to debrief. We'll talk about ongoing support and next steps, and then we'll wrap it up. So first, our objectives really today, it's all about skills. So we want to learn the OER approach to geography. We want to be able to discuss and share interventions that support student understanding of geography skills in the classroom. I know that my students definitely need a little bit more geography skills. Even today in my US history class, we were talking about we're talking about like the Articles of Confederation. We talked about the Northwest Ordinance. We talked about all the states in certain areas being more square. And I had students and they were just like, I don't know, like I know that I learned the 50 states, and these are sophomores in high school. They're like, but I don't think I could name them. Like I don't think I could tell where all the different states are from. And I was like, all right, we're definitely going to do a map at some point this year, because even though we already did some, we need to definitely integrate that a little bit more. And then we're going to talk about how you can actually get started with all of these OER project tools in your classroom. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. I also would like to welcome Megan Suits. Megan, if you want to unmute and introduce yourselves a little bit, she's going to be our chat moderator for the night.
Hi, I am Megan Suits. I'm a history teacher in South Jersey, about 53 miles from Trenton. I have been teaching for quite some time using OER project materials, and I, like Andrea said, I'm just here to help out in the chat, drop the links, open breakout rooms, and try to answer any questions along the way.
Great. And a little bit about me, aside from what I told you with my Mr. Helps. I have been a social studies teacher in New Jersey for, this is now my 18th year. I have worked with OER Project for the past several years. I teach the Origins project, the Origins course, and then I kind of integrate some of the 1200 materials as well. And I've also done some of the climate project courses. All right, so a couple norms, and I started talking about this a little bit, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, absolutely would love for you to unmute. Feel free to raise your hand at any point. I guess everybody's hand raising is going to be in different spots. But for me, the hand raise, I think was right. Oh, I just went too far. I went too far looking for the hand raise. Yeah, it's right on the bottom for me. So hopefully it's similar for everybody to be able to see the hand raise in case you have any questions. But again, you feel free to unmute and just interrupt us, or if you want to, you can also type into the chat and we'll be able to answer your questions. Megan can let me know if I'm missing anything in the chat and she can answer you as well. Again, ask those questions. Use the chat to share any anecdotes or resources. So if you were like, oh wait, yeah, that I did something similar, or I have this other idea, definitely pop it into the chat. We're always, I know as a teacher, I'm always looking for other sources. Like camera on is preferred, but totally understand if, you have other stuff going on and you, in the background, it's better for you to be off camera. But if you can, we'd love to be able to see everybody's lovely faces. Collaboration really is key to everyone's success, so if you can collaborate, if you can unmute and talk, if you can type into the chat and work together well in the, when we get into the breakout rooms, that would be great. Your personal needs come first though, so if you need to step out for a second, feel free to do that. This time really is for you. It's really about collaboration and hoping that we can, find new ways to integrate stuff into the classroom so we can help students all throughout the world. So OER project courses, just to kind of introduce what OER project is. If you've joined us for some of the other skills clinics, I know this might be a little bit of something you've already heard, but want to make sure that everybody who's joining us understands exactly what our OER project is. So they work with educators and researchers and academics. They develop free online comprehensive curricula. So everything, once you sign up for your account, you have access to all of the different materials that are on OER project. It is way more than you could ever do, in one school year. But there's definitely something that you'd be able to find for whatever your needs are. We do believe in teachers as professionals, so we want to make sure that we can work and support instructional growth. And a lot of the focus for OER project is on historical thinking practices, it's on inquiry and skills development, and that's a big part of each of the courses. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can also see what those courses are. So we have Big History Project. That was the very first foundational course. We talked about a single narrative and framework for all knowledge. It kind of integrated science and social studies together. World History Project then was the next major course that starts with a brief history of the universe and then connects a little bit to BHP. You can have a couple different time frames that you can look at with World History Project. We have early humans, starting with just the origins. There's the 1750 course, and then there's a 1200 course that was created to meet different state requirements as well. World History Project AP is a newer course. It is aligned to AP World History and the modern CED, and so that is great. We unfortunately don't have it at my school, but I know that they have been looking into possibly bringing it, so I'm excited about that. And then we have the Climate Project Extension. It is a 3-week supplemental unit. I've used this after AP exams, so if you do teach AP classes, then it's a great one to be able to integrate and provide students with something meaningful after the exams. I know for us in New Jersey, exams are beginning of May, but we go till about June 20th, 21st, something like that. So we still have a pretty good chunk of time during that time frame. All right, so why geography skills? I also teach AP Human Geography, so for me, geography is also something that I like to focus on. But the goal of teaching geography is to equip students with knowledge, skills, and perspectives to do geography. Reaching this goal requires that students learn how to use geographic thinking and information to make well-reasoned decisions and to solve personal and community problems. So I'm going to stop for a second. It's not just about memorizing maps. Maps are important, but it's not about memorization of them. It's really about being able to analyze them, being able to look at that information and do something with it, right? That's the idea of doing geography. To continue, many valuable applications of K-12 geography education lie beyond the classroom walls. Geographic education enables students to use geographic perspectives, knowledge, and skills to engage in ethical action with regard to self, other people, other species, and Earth's diverse cultures and natural environment. Geography connects students to world events, to problems, and to decisions throughout their lives. So that is a great explanation of why geography is so important, because it's not just about memorization and looking at stuff in the classroom. It's about kind of bridging that gap between what we see in the real world and how we can integrate it into the classroom. So, a little discussion question. How often do you currently use maps or map activities in your classroom? Again, feel free to unmute and just kind of blurt it out, or else if you can also put it into the chat.
I'll jump in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
So I use mapping in my classroom almost daily, but definitely at least 3 times a week. I have my students have a map binder. I teach world history. I teach 7th grade world history, and they know absolutely nothing about geography. And because we're all over the place, I want them to be able to visually connect with wherever we are at any given time when we're talking about various things in history. And I want them to be able to see whatever countries are there interacting. So I give them a series of maps as we go through each unit, and we do various things where we identify spots on the map and we see where, countries are in relationship to each other and how they have an influence on one another. Because that's so critical to them understanding like some of the cultural connections and all of that. But yeah, I love OER project stuff. I sign up for as many of your courses as I possibly can, because you guys are amazing. You are the one PD that I will swear by, because like you said, you don't waste our time. I love it.
So glad to hear that. Anybody else want to unmute and jump in? not. And we can also look through some of the, I see some people saying that they color as you move to new locations, at least once a week or sometimes only a couple times a month. So it definitely differs. Oh, your dogs are too loud to unmute. That's funny. I hope you don't hear my kids in the background because I hear them screaming downstairs a little bit too, probably chasing after the dog. This is what's great about the course is it helps us to try to move past maybe, just coloring or just trying to find locations on the map and then understand, like you said, more about that culture, more about how those locations impact the way people live their lives. And so it's great to see that so many people are using maps and using geography as skills in the classroom. And we want to hopefully extend that a little bit to help even more. So the OER project approach to geography, most units do include two activities related to maps. There's an opening geography activity where they can kind of look at the time and the space, and it does provide that kind of background information, that geographic context for what the world looked like during that time period. Because as we move through time, things are shifting and changing. I don't know how your schools are, but I definitely have some globes that still have the USSR on them in our school. So there's which I'm keeping to use as a historical reference so that we can actually see what did the world look like during this point in time. We have some new ones as well, but I think being able to check that out in that time frame is really helpful. So in the opening activity, students will examine a set of maps. They will brainstorm predictions about major changes in the coming unit. So they get to take a look, and that's really about that analysis. They have to think about, all right, well, if this is what we learned so far, this is what the world looks like at this point in time, or this is what this region looks like at this point in time. Like, what's going to happen in the future? Where do we see this going? And then towards the end of the unit, they kind of check whether or not their predictions are true, right? They have a more detailed and like closing map activity. They will apply their CCOT, their continuity and change over time. They will apply their causation skills, and they will analyze these different themes. They'll take a look at long distance trade. They'll take a look at the spread of religion, the transatlantic slave trade, imperialism. So all these closing activities, they'll be able to use geographic evidence. They will respond to writing prompts based on the unit problems and the frame narratives. So it's really an all-encompassing type of idea. It's not just, okay, well, here's this map, and now here's another map, and it changed a little bit. It's really like, okay, well, why did it change? What didn't change? And then it goes back to those major unit problems to be able to take a look at. So there's different map layers that we see. We have political layers, which will identify those communities that students will encounter in each unit. So, we have large empires, we have nation states, the usual things that they might think of when they think about a map, when they think about, all right, well, if I'm going to look at a map of the country or of the world, like, what will I see? That's what they normally see. We then add in thematic layers. So this is going to be where they have to really analyze it. And then they have to be able to use it as evidence. They have to be able to support their ideas. They have to be able to extend their knowledge. They have to challenge the frame's narrative. So that is more of the information, right? And not just the locations and the specific names and titles, but what is going on in those parts of the world or in those regions, and what are the themes and how they connect to what we're learning about big picture wise. And then we finally have that actionable layer. We have those blank black and white version of the political map. You can zoom in on, you can crop, you can use it however you need to. You can use it for quizzes, you can use it for activities, you can print it out and have students, color it and then analyze it, and however you want to use that. So that actionable layer is really helpful for me. Again, students have this, and we are trying to work on this skill, but if they look at a map of the world and I'm asking them to try to find this region on the map and copy things down onto this regional size map, they have a hard time. We have to go through that process of like, all right, well, let's take a look at where are the bodies of water? Like, where might this be located? But they have a hard time transferring from one type of a map to another one. So having that actionable layer there that actually matches what is on OER project is helpful, although we do try to work on some of those skills as well. All right, so we're going to go into our first Maptivity breakout. And for this, you are going to review one of the map assignments. So this is all from Unit 8. So this is the first map activity. We're going to take a look at 2 maps from Unit 8. We're going to look at the first one, then we're going to look at the end one, and you're going to be able to see how those activities transition. So we're going to share the link with you for that first map. We want you to read those teacher materials. So steps 1, 2, and 3. And then in a small group in the breakout rooms, do those steps align with gradual release planning? So a lot of us, students do have to go through those steps. They do have to have some scaffolding. Does this help with that? If yes, which portions would align? If no, do you have any suggestions for modifications? Or is there anything that you would switch around in your classroom in order to make it fit your own students in your classroom mold? What pre-planning would you need to do for the small group portion of the activity? And then where might teachers need to provide additional supports for students? Thinking about your own group of students, are there some more supports that they need? Maybe you have students who excel in mapping and you would have one group that would be able to do something, an extension part of it. What kind of extensions? So just really to kind of get into that first mapping activity for Unit 8. We would love for everybody to have one spokesperson from the room to report out to the group once we reconvene. So in order to pick that, I'm gonna give you a challenge of, since we talked about how close you were to the capital, to your local capital, whoever is the closest to the capital will have to be our spokesperson for this first breakout room. We'll do it that way. So that way there's no fighting about it, because I know everybody wants to share. So we will get you into those breakout rooms. We'll have probably about 8 to 10 minutes within those breakout rooms for you to really kind of take a couple minutes to read through and then actually have that discussion. I'll try to pop in and out of the breakout rooms to see if anybody needs anything while you are working. And then we have Megan, who already posted the geography Unit 8 mapping for part 1. So you can definitely click on that link to get to it, and she'll put you in the breakout rooms.
Sorry, I was also working very quickly to do a document that has the questions. So if you want the questions from the slide, I was like, let me do that real fast. So I did that. And yes, now I'll break these rooms.
Okay, as everybody is coming back from their breakout rooms, hopefully that was enough time for you to take a look at the resources. Probably should have mentioned, because I know there are a couple of people who are confused clicking on the link. The link will bring you to the directions for the students, but they will not bring you to the directions for the teachers. So you have to actually be logged into your OER account first in order to be able to see the teacher version of the directions. So if that helps clear up any confusion.
Yeah,
I would
that's a good point.
some people, explain what they looked at and tell us if you have any suggestions. Does it align to gradual release? Is there anything that you would need to do within the classroom to change things up a little?
Our group had a question because we weren't entirely clear on what it meant by gradual release. And I felt better that it wasn't just me, because there were a bunch of us in there that were like, what do they mean by that?
So I guess gradual release for me, I think of it as like more step-by-step type of things. Like one thing that we can do just before you're just like, okay, do all of this on your own. Like, can we get through this one first part of it, make sure we're all on the same page, and then do one part as a class maybe, and then move on to do something as a small group. And then eventually students can do something individually. So a little bit of release from the group perspective or class-wide perspective to the individual perspective.
Okay, that's helpful. That makes me feel better, because that's kind of where we were all guessing, but we weren't sure.
Okay, so that is good for me to take a note of to make sure everybody is on the same page with gradual release also. For
Is it this, another way to talk about it might be scaffolding?
Yeah, scaffolding.
Does that resonate with folks?
Mm-hmm. So were there, based on what you thought, but for that idea of gradual release or scaffolding, was there anything, like, would that align to what you would be expected to do in the classroom? Is there anything that you would change or switch up? Is there any type of pre-planning that you would want to do in your classes before starting this activity? Yeah, go ahead. Let's see.
So this particular one, when in our group, none of the other people had taught this one before, but I did do this one last year. And one of the things that I pointed out is that in Unit 8, it's toward actually the end of some of our sections here. So as far as scaffolding goes, this is definitely not an exercise that we would have just given to the students. They would have had an entire portfolio that they would have had to build up throughout the entire year. So like literally this was a lesson that we had taught in May. And so they had been on a daily, if not weekly basis, building a new map and making connections. So they would have already come in knowing that, okay, we've just survived World War I. We're still angry with absolutely everybody everywhere. And all of these crisscross patterns of networks are still in a huge, huge problem. Nationalism is going crazy. And so now we're into World War II. We've just come out of World War II. Nationalism is at a different level. So now we have allies, we have the Cold War starting. And so you have all of these different things that they would have come into this map having already done activities on. So as far as like scaffolding and doing a release process with this, I just think that example of this lesson is way at the end of the scaffolding. So as far as what we need for our students, I teach in Minnesota and I have 7th and 8th graders and I have world geography that I'm working with. And we use the origins for world geography.
Right.
And in that process, we really, really have to start with the super, super basics of being able to look at a map that's flat and be able to transition that to the visual understanding of a sphere and being able to move around the globe. And even though our flat maps many times are Eurocentric, what does it mean when we're looking at Afrocentric? What does it mean when we're looking at Asian centric? What does it mean when we're looking at Pacific centric? And as we move that around, being able to connect those dots with it. So for us, we spend an insane amount of time of really doing the map basics that were kind of an expectation for 3rd and 4th grade that just didn't get carried up into the middle school. And so we're reteaching a lot of that. So as far as scaffolding and gradual release, we have a solid 2 months of just what do you do with maps? And what do you do with the people that are in those maps and making those connections?
Okay, so that's good to know, right? So hopefully by the time you get to this point, then they would have already had that scaffolding to be able to understand it and do this a little bit more on their own. And I know not everybody is able to go into detail with maps so much. So I think part of it too is also just for somebody who has a classroom who is kind of just starting to introduce maps by Unit 8, hopefully they've already been looking at a couple of them, but by Unit 8, is this something that they'd be able to do? Anybody else have any feedback or anything else that you'd like to share?
So in room 5, we also struggle with the idea of what exactly was the process. Somebody explained to us the gradual release. And we agreed that they need a little bit more context. We're presuming they just finished World War II. And I've used an animated map that basically shows this one. You were talking about just being Eurocentric, focusing on the European war for a moment and seeing the Soviets move from one side of the map and seeing British and Americans move from the other side and meeting eventually in Germany, that sort of seeing this kind of blob grow from both sides and meeting. If you just pause there and narrowed it down rather than, like one of our members said, doing the whole world might be a bit much right away. But if you could just go to Europe for a moment and then you could overlay that to that animated video showing Poland and Czechoslovakia and Germany being swallowed up by the Soviets, and then the Americans and British and French getting to half of it, and you just pause there, then you could do a part of this just focusing on Europe and show them how that would work just in those few countries. Then you could, I think, reach out to the rest of the world. So I like teaching them, giving them a specific example, like just focus on what's going to happen to Poland. It's sandwiched in between Germany and Soviets, and then it's what are the Soviets going to do? Are they going to let go of that? and have them predict on that. So they're doing a prediction based on what they see in the video, and then have them, confirm what they're saying or not, do a little direct teaching on that, and then broaden it to the whole world. All right, so now let's apply that to the rest. How is the world going to align?
Okay, I like that idea. So you can give them a little bit more specific, concrete example before opening it up to where did all of this eventually go to. Okay, that's a great one. Sounds like a great video too. Anybody else have anything that they'd want to share out?
We had somebody in group 3 ask a great question. They were looking at the last part of the activity and asking, how are the students going to know the individual colonies? They've got this place where they're identifying empires, but where do you get the individual colonies from, and how would you know kind of where to mark the X's? Is that
Right. Okay. So I believe there's a political map that goes along with it that is helpful for students to be able to know. So I guess the idea is also like they'd be able to use the political map to label those countries, and then they'd have that one for the part where the X on the 5 colonies that they think will gain independence. So once they actually label whatever the empire is, so they choose one of those empires, they would use a map to be able to color in those areas of that empire on a global scale, and then they would make their prediction. So they would have to kind of take a look at that and just make a blind. That's where they don't really have the information for it yet. So it is more just like a guess, based on what they know, based on what they've seen and patterns, and maybe a little bit of their own background knowledge that they already know. They probably won't have a direct answer for it. It's really just for them to make a prediction, take a guess, and then it gives them a little bit more of a connection to when they get to that next activity. So they can see like, all right, was my prediction correct? Like, did I figure something out, or where was I right? Where was I wrong? So I think it's more just getting them to have that personal connection for the ideas.
so the colonies would be basically what we might think of as modern day countries, but so Algeria, for example, the students might pick, so they might pick a French colony, they might pick an Italian colony or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
And then they can see afterwards, is that something that actually took place?
Great. Thank you.
All right, so since we kind of went over a little bit about this first math activity, we're going to move on to the one towards the end of Unit 8, and we'll get into breakout rooms again. So again, we will have you read through the teacher materials. The link will be coming into the chat momentarily. There it is, Megan's right on top of it. So again, if you did not have access to the teacher version of it, then I recommend logging into your OER project account or creating one if you don't have one yet, so that you can really see those teacher directions. You're going to take a look at that Unit 8 mapping part 2. Think about what is the difference between the second activity and then that first Unit 8 mapping part 1. So the one that you just talked about, and now you're going to see kind of like that final example of it. Is there anything you could do to extend student thinking after completing the activity? And where might teachers need to provide additional supports for students? So this one again, like if you have students who are already great and they would be able to do this, what else could you do to extend it? And then how about those students that are struggling? Again, if you could designate a spokesperson, this is great to hear all of those ideas that you had within the breakout rooms. This time, maybe we'll do the person who is furthest from their capital. So we'll mix it up a little bit. Okay. So breakout rooms will be coming in a second. All right, so we have everybody coming back from those breakout rooms. Hopefully you were able to see how this activity connected to that first mapping activity from Unit 8. Again, love to hear some of your thoughts. What did you see as differences? Did you think that this would help students kind of reflect upon the unit? Is there anything you would do to extend or provide additional supports for anybody? So whoever wants to share out.
Again, and I think in our group, it's a lot to take in. And for our kids, it's better when it's kind of smaller. You could go regional. And I'm sorry, just we've had so much focus here in New York with, and it's as much as we say it's not, we're teaching towards the test.
Mm-hmm.
So, ultimately, what do the kids need to glean from working with these maps that is going to help them to write a better essay, to, pass a test? So,
Right. So, I mean,
is
and
it
that's,
is it colonization? Is it, issues after independence? Is it the scramble for resources in the 21st century?
yeah, I understand that. So sometimes it kind of depends on where your students are. And I guess that's part of the idea of that gradual release or that scaffolding, or that's what I like about OER is that you really can take the materials and change them up to be what you want them to be. So if you're not necessarily concerned about students being able to identify the countries, you can kind of skip that first path, that first part where they take a look and try to name the country that was created and what area had controlled it. And you can skip ahead maybe to just step 3 if that's what you're really trying to take a look at. Have them see maybe is there what do they see about the Cold War? How do these two maps, those comparison maps? What do they see about decolonization? Have them write something about it. So you can change it up depending on what the needs are of your classroom. Definitely, whenever you're using the OER materials, feel free to do that. If you're like, this part doesn't work, this doesn't make any sense for my kids, or my kids already know how to do this, then skip it, change it, do what works for you. That's kind of the purpose of this, is to talk about it, but not necessarily, you don't have to do everything that's listed here exactly. So I see in the chat talking about extending learning by having students connect what they mapped to modern day issues, events, and consequences. That would definitely be great to get into some current events. I like that idea, absolutely. Talking about bringing in different map projections and having students discuss the perspective changes, how perspective changes what information. So that would kind of go into that again, that idea of regional versus global. You can change the scale of analysis and change the information, and they can definitely get different information based on that. Okay, color coding needs to be more consistent with they can get a little bit busy. I could see that too. Anybody else want to unmute and share out some things that you might have talked about in your groups?
I like this one a lot better than the first one. I didn't really like the first one at all because I didn't think that students could reasonably make guesses based on what was provided. This one seems a lot better to me. It seems a lot more accessible because I think there's enough information in the maps for students to make a guess, even if it's wrong. And in the first one, I don't think they'd even know where to begin.
Okay, and that's fair too. And again, that's something where you could take out that last step in that first map and have them just take a look at where are these empires and what are the lands that they take a hold of. And you don't have to necessarily get to that last part if you don't think your students would understand it. If you think it would cause more confusion, then absolutely. Any other ideas that anyone wants to share out?
I
Yeah,
have it. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I suggested, for context, talking about the end of World War II, you've got Britain is a victor, but is still weakened. So creating some kind of T-chart analysis, like what are the assets of Britain? They have colonies, they have resources. Why would they hold on to those colonies? But then there's also the cost of the colonies on the negative column. They made promises of freedom, and are they going to follow through on those? They're fighting for the ideals of democracy and freedom, but then they're like holding on and using people. So you could do that as a primer, and then just like focus on Britain, just focus on their colonies, and see like which of these does it make most sense for Britain to unload. You might also need, like what are the resources in those countries? And, like, are those necessary for war making? Well, if the war is over, can we let them go? Is the expense greater? So you might need to do some priming there, providing some background information on what's the upside to colonies, what's the downside. That should have already come, but I think another mini lesson on why colonies in the first place would give them more like why Britain let them go over time. And so I would also focus on, Britain was in a position of weakness. Some of their industry was destroyed, and they were borrowing a bunch of money from the United States. So I think, again, zeroing in on one of those, or what happened with France and their colonies, Germany, whatever, I think you could have zeroed in and then expand. I agree with everyone. It's too much for the students to take in all at once.
So that's another example of something where you could maybe do that, like we do, you do type of thing, where you kind of show that example, provide a mini lesson, use Great Britain as an example, talk about that decolonization, and then let students work in groups to pick another empire and see how, what they think might have happened there. Other comments?
I think it's
I
also
think
really
too.
important
Go
to
ahead.
recognize that we aren't looking at these mapping exercises as standalones. The mapping exercise is integrated fully into all of the other lessons. So as you're going through the resources in the OER project for, say, Unit 8, like we're looking at, we have a ton of videos, we have a ton of articles, we have a ton of graphic novel bios in there that are all integrated into this. So at no point do I ever expect any of my students to be able to pick up any of the mapping activities and just run with it. It's all an integrated part of it. So I would never have any of these mapping activities as a standalone. It's really part of the integrated timeline and lesson building. And so, and I mentioned this before, but like Unit 8 is the end of this. So the students should have had 8 months of school and education up to this point before they got here.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good point too about all the resources, because there, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many resources within OER Project. Sometimes it's hard to pick and choose, and sometimes you're forced to for time or for standards that you have to focus on. But if you are taking a look at decolonization mostly from the British perspective, if that's what your standards are, then absolutely, focus on that with the map activity. If you have other areas of the world that you can talk about as well, then great, you can integrate that. But they should have the main background knowledge of it, at least for the events that are going on from other resources from Unit 8. That's kind of why there's one at the beginning and one towards the end of the unit, to kind of almost like bookends, to make sure that they can understand and visualize what was going on along with the other articles and things that they've been reading. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, sorry, just as a little aside, for those of us who've been at this a little while or in our twilight, it just makes me a little wistful for the historical atlases we used to teach with, or at least when I started back in the late 80s, early 90s. We had things like that, to supplement, the stuff we were doing on the blackboard. So anyway.
So we do have one more activity for breakout rooms, and this one is if you are maybe not going to use the entire map activity, for maybe you're not going to use the part 1, or maybe you're not going to use part 2, if you want to focus just on one particular map. So it's one that's also a part of this, which is that decolonization and Cold War thematic map. So let's say this is a little bit too overwhelming. How could you use just one of the maps, right? So we kind of integrated that a little bit as well. So if you want to just look at one map, what are things that would work in your classroom? Could you have a do now where you have them take a look at the map and say, like, all right, is there something interesting that you see? Is there something surprising that you see when you look at the map? What would you want students to gain from using that one map alone? So if those, if it's too many aspects to it when you're looking at it all together, what could you do just with that one map? If you did use the map alone, how could it be used to engage students in a classroom activity? And what are some appropriate interventions that you'd be able to provide as they engage with this activity? So are there different supports? Are there different extensions? What would you want to make sure that you did previously, either from the unit from OER, or if there's other aspects that you would bring into the classroom? So we did kind of also think about that. If you are using some of these maps individually, what would work for you for that? So we have, again, that decolonization map that's linked there, and we'll get you into the breakout rooms again. Okay, so this one was focused just on one map, and without necessarily any specific questions provided by OER. Just wondering how you would use it in the classroom. So love to hear what ideas you came up with in your breakout rooms. Any brave souls out there? Or if you want to, you can type into the chat. I know for me, taking a look at this, I would probably have that first question there. What's something that you see that's interesting or surprising when you look at this map? I might put that up on the board, either at the beginning of the unit or at the end of the unit, and just have students take a look at it and analyze, maybe make some predictions from the beginning if I wasn't going to do the full mapping activity, or at the end have them, do that before we dive into it a little bit more. Or any specific questions that you came up with for just using that map alone? Would you relate it to the questions that are like the theme questions, the big picture questions from the unit?
I say another for our unit, we talked, or our group, we talked about maybe doing something where you're taking the map and kind of like grouping these countries as they're gaining their independence and saying, okay, well, who are they becoming independent from? Why is 1960 such a popular year? Why is it that, France gives independence to these nations and, 3 or 4 nations in this year, but holds on to, another nation for a couple of years? Why, kind of exploring the wins and the why of decolonization as it's happening so that they can better understand that it's not, just better understand the process, right? Better understand that, how this process unfolds and how it's not necessarily something that's, just like the benevolence of these European nations is what's giving them their independence, right? Where there are, nations that are fighting for it. So maybe they are a little bit earlier, maybe they're even a little bit later because the colonizing nation is holding on to them longer because of resources or because of, ongoing conflict.
I like those ideas. That sounds great. And again, with that, if you had done maybe the earlier mapping activity, that could be a good example of like having them take a look at what did they predict and then what do they see. It's also really good ideas for inquiry, right? Having students think about those questions and ask those questions and then see where they can find the answers. What kind of research, what kind of things could they go back to and resources could they use to try to find that information? I definitely like that grouping of them together. Any other ideas that other groups came up with? I know it's getting a little bit late. We're almost at the end of our time. So I'll move on. Hopefully you had some good conversations and got some good ideas from your breakout rooms at least. So just a little bit about next steps. We do have some district and state specific support. So I know that some people are talking about, trying to teach to the test a little bit in New York. There are some course alignments and standards alignment documentation. There's state specific course plans. There's a lot of professional development opportunities that we'll talk about also. But I highly recommend taking a look at this part of the website so that you can see if you are from a specific state where you could use some of this information. Because like I said, it's way more than you can actually ever use in a year. So it's helpful to see what other teachers within your school, within your state do in order to kind of pick and choose what best aligns with your standards. So Megan just dropped that link into the chat. Getting started, you did have a chance to take a look at some of these resources, and we'll get into the lesson specifics in a second. But some of the other resources that might be helpful for you at the beginning of each unit or era, if you're doing the Origins course, you have this nice little box of teacher resources. So we have that unit guide, we have vocab cards and unit vocab, which is something that I always struggle with integrating, but need to do a little bit more of. So I always go to them when I'm like, oh man, I really need to do more vocab. We have Google Doc versions of things so that you're not always using PDFs. You don't always have to print stuff out. It kind of has that conversion for you. And also a survey for each of the units for some feedback. So if you do have some suggestions or you just things that you love or things that maybe you needed to tweak a little bit, how are you tweaking that for your classroom? Because it's great to be able to share it with other teachers as well. And then how each OER project lesson is structured. Again, you did see this when taking a look at those different math activities, but you could see that each one has learning objectives. There are article summaries, there's guiding questions, there's sample answers. You'll see video summaries and you'll have the questions for those videos. You'll see sample answers as well. You can take a look at the student view as well as the teacher view. For the teacher view, you do have to be logged in. So, definitely make sure that you are logged in because they don't want the students to be able to see the teacher view. And this is just, a great way to have all of your lessons kind of planned out. I know when I'm writing lesson plans, I like to go here because the objectives are great to just kind of pop into my objectives for my lesson plans. And it's a nice, simple way of doing things. And then the OER project community, I always love getting feedback. I try to go in the community, sometimes things get busy and I don't get on as often as I like to, but whenever I have a question, if there's ever some support, if I'm like, hey, I know I'm going to get observed, what suggestions do you have? Or this activity, I need to tweak it a little bit. How would you tweak this? There are so many people who are willing to jump on and to help answer questions. So I definitely highly, highly recommend if you have not joined the teacher community to definitely do that. You can ask for support. You can share ideas, you can find inspiration, you can be a lurker like I was for a little bit, just watching and seeing other questions that people asked and reading their answers and getting other materials. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll be able to jump in if you have questions as you consider teaching an OER project course or as you get further along, or maybe see a new resource that you haven't used before. You can definitely do that. There is a specific new to OER project forum that you can join as well. And there's no additional login needed. It's all there for you to be able to jump in and ask and answer those questions. So highly recommend the community if you haven't done that before. And then if you are ready to learn more, if you want to learn more about OER project course offerings, if you want to begin your plan your year, if you want to do an onboarding session, if you want to do more of these skills clinics, the professional development is there on the website. Definitely check it out to see what other types of PDs are coming up. There are also some of the PDs that you can do that are, just videos that you can watch as you go through if you have questions about those. So again, more things to check out, more links being dropped in the chat. And I just want to say thank you. This was a really great session. I love being able to hear everybody's ideas. The breakout rooms, everybody seemed to have great discussions going on. And hopefully you learned a few more ways to integrate some of these mapping activities and these geography activities into your classroom, whether you use them just as OER Project has them or whether you need to tweak them, make whatever changes you need to make. It's really just for you. That's why all these resources are here. Use them as you see fit, as you think would better help your students. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you at some future sessions.
Hi, I had a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
I've been really, I'm teaching civics and, but like I'm doing, mentor teaching and stuff like that. And, it's all been very good. I've been to 3 sessions now and they've been really good and it's been great. Tons of resources, and it's hard to find resources. So I'm just very thankful for you guys. I just wanted to say that. I signed up for this is my 3rd one I went to. I signed up for the certificate on the first one and I emailed Ms. Biederman, I think her name was, and I still haven't gotten she's emailed me back. She said, y'all were behind, but I still haven't got a certificate, from the first session.
I'll reach out to her and see if there's anything I can do to assist to get them out a little faster.
And then I need to do, I know like I did what was the last one? I forgot what the last one was. The 3 close reads and then,